Throughout history, man has attempted to explain things far beyond his comprehension through storytelling. And one of the first and foremost questions surrounding these ancient peoples was, where did we come from? Now obviously, mythology steps in and takes the reins by explaining that there are higher beings in the universe, beings we presently call gods, who govern certain aspects of nature and the human spirit, and should be revered and even worshipped for their duties they perform. But somewhere along the line, a few people must have stopped to wonder, well, if we came from the gods, where did the gods come from? Well, for many mythologies, there was often a family tree, more often than not focusing on the direct lineage of the chieftain god. But what about the grandfathers of the grandfather gods? As you can probably imagine, lineage for any given god only goes back so far, before the ancient people were left just as puzzled by the origin of gods as they were of themselves. In most mythological creation stories, all which is described is a vast, chaotic, and empty void. Well, semi-empty. You see, the concept of a void essentially entails that there are no heavens, no sky, no earth, nothing of that sort. Yet curiously enough, out of seemingly nothing, there can spring to life a single entity who spearheads creation. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, yet these ancient people literally cornered themselves when coming up with these scriptures, so I'll cut them a little slack, seeing as imagining an absolute dense nothingness is difficult enough. It only becomes more of a brain buster when you try to explain that something can come from absolute nothingness. Well, almost absolute nothingness. Because in a lot of creation myths, the void is not really a void, because it's suddenly filled with water. Out of literally nowhere. Most famously in Jewish mythology, where the Torah describes an absolutely blank, empty void, and yet it's covered with water by the time Yahweh shows up to start creating things. However, this seems to be an idea shared among a multitude of different cultures. Some way, somehow, the infinite void, which serves as a blank canvas by which all creation will be painted, has water involved, including Egyptian, Hindu, Sumerian, and Hawaiian mythologies to name just a few. However, some get a bit more asinine than that, such as with Zulu mythology, where there is not only the presence of an earth, but also a premature creation vessel, in this case taking the form of a seed which is planted into the earth, don't ask me how, and sprouts into the Uthlanga reeds, which serve as the source of all things. Another case of the void not being so voidy is in Norse creation theory, where you actually have 2 of the 9 realms already made up. Niflheim, freezing land of the north, and Muspelheim, a world of fire, lava, and a whole bunch of other hot, burny, do not touch these things or you will die, lying in the south. Between these 2 realms is the great giant chasm full of, well, nothing, called Ginnungagap. And according to Norse mythology, it was only after years and years of the ashes of Muspelheim melting the ice of Niflheim that the first giant, Ymir, came into being, and the rest from there is history. Well, technically mythology, but you get the point. It just seems that throughout the world, all these different people from different parts of the world saw the beginning of everything as nothing more than a vast, empty void, save a body of water or a god or two. The only exceptions to this that I know of off the top of my head are Greek mythology, where Gaia, or the personification of the earth, forced herself into form out of the literal nothingness of chaos, which is described as an actual void wherein there is absolutely nothing. Another mythology which also describes a void producing primordial gods is Celtic mythology, where Dawn and Danu came from. Don't worry, we'll get a lot more into Celtic mythology because it's frickin' awesome. Although it is also worth mentioning that this void also created Earth somewhere off screen, so maybe it was there to begin with, maybe it created around the same time as Dawn and Danu. The scriptures for Celtic mythology are a little bit hazy. Now, in the aforementioned mythologies, it's entirely possible that the waters or the earth itself could have been produced from the void, yet in these cases the myths do not explicitly mention this, so therefore we're left to chalk it up to a mindset wherein the ancient people who wrote this stuff never really took that into consideration. However, the ancient people shouldn't feel too bad, considering even more modern mythologies, such as the myths of Pegana, also describe a void. And then the personification of fate and chance, as well as Mana Yu Chushai, who is the always capitalized name of the absolute chieftain god who no mortal is even allowed to worship, only gods. so it's kind of weird that the mortals know about him, but, whatever. So, yeah, the whole void thing is basically a big wall authors of both ancient and modern times can't seem to think around, with a few exceptions. An interesting example of this is Chinese mythology, where the beginning of all things was not a void, but rather an egg, which the first man, Pangu, sprang from and created all things by himself. Or all things from his corpse, depending on which source you're studying. Now, I might be a bit facetious in saying this, but there does exist a very definite possibility that there was indeed a void of nothingness surrounding the egg before it hatched. So take that as you will. This void character is rather mysterious, in not only how similar it is throughout the world's many mythologies, but also in how it is named. In many cultures, it is referred to as chaos, or the Old World's translation's equivalent to the word chaos. However, in many other mythologies, it's simply referred to as the void, or the darkness. Imaginative, I know. But let's give our ancestors a little bit of slack, because in many cases, even in modern times, the concept of a void is all we puny, third-dimension-bound humans can truthfully understand beyond what we know. Take, for example, our modern and scientific explanation for the universe. As vast as it is, we know that it is, in fact, expanding. But expanding into what? What surrounds the universe we reside in? If you believe in the concept of multiple universes, what is the space which keeps them separate? And what was there before the Big Bang and the birth of the universe? All of these questions lead to an answer of, I don't know. Yet when you tried to visualize everything I just described to you, I'd be willing to bet you thought of cold, dark, empty nothingness. Didn't you? It just seems to be the default way of our thinking, no matter what generation you belong to. Anyway, I know this is a kind of a lame character study, seeing as the void in any given mythology isn't really a major character, as much as it is a personified version of an infinite nothingness which births gods. And water. But nonetheless, it's interesting to figure that all cultures throughout the world begin their stories with some degree of absolute darkness before the actual creation begins. And if you would like to see me expand on some of these creation myths, comment a few mythologies down below, and the most highly requested one will be the first one I cover. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to like it and subscribe to my channel, because we've got a lot more mythology to cover. So until then, I've been Messiahs and Mythologies, and thanks for watching.